Every struggle was strategic. Nothing you faced was wasted. There are moments in life when we wonder, was it all worth it? The quiet nights where your prayers felt unanswered, the mornings when getting out of bed felt like a betrayal to your own exhaustion, the conversations that turned into silence, the dreams that flickered dim. But none of it was wasted. You must understand, struggle is not chaos, it's strategy. The pain you endured shaped your perception. The closed doors were not insults to your ambition. They were instructions, soft whispers saying, not this way, not yet. You didn't break, you were being built. The delay you cursed was the exact thing that kept you safe from counterfeit opportunities. Isolation was your invitation to transformation. The loneliness was not abandonment, it was alignment. You were never cast out, you were called apart. People disappeared, not because you weren't worthy of their love, but because your soul was being restructured for something they were never meant to carry. The silence in your seasons of solitude was not empty. It was full of recalibration, revelation, and redirection. The isolation invited you to examine yourself without the noise of applause or the poison of comparison. Transformation never happens in crowds. Diamonds don't form in daylight, but deep beneath pressure in hidden places, and so did you. When you were being ignored, God was preparing your reward. You may think no one saw you, that your consistency went unnoticed, that your kindness was wasted, that your loyalty was used. But that's never the full story. While others overlooked you, heaven took record. Not one tear was wasted. Not one step in faith was in vain. You were being watched, not by spectators, but by a God who rewards in secret what is sown in silence. Your name may not have been in rooms you wanted, but your heart was being refined for rooms you never imagined. Every moment you were ignored by people, you were being highlighted by the divine. Delay is not denial, it's divine refinement. We are a generation obsessed with speed. We confuse pace with purpose. But waiting is not the absence of progress. It is preparation. You see, what you're called to receive is heavy. It's not cheap, it's not easy, and it cannot be rushed. The reward that's coming isn't a trophy for talent. It's a testimony of trust. The waiting didn't weaken you. It strengthened your root system. Trees that bear great fruit spend more time growing underground than above it. And now, because you waited when it was painful, you're ready to carry what others would have dropped. The reward matches the refinement. God never forgets faithfulness. What's coming into your life isn't random, it's righteous. It is a harvest specifically tailored to your obedience. You didn't take shortcuts. You refused bitterness. You chose character over clout, integrity over impulse, and heaven never overlooks faithfulness. The reward you're about to receive will not just restore what you lost. It will resurrect what you thought was dead. Opportunities will find you. Doors you didn't knock on will open. People will call you blessed, but they'll never understand the crushing it took to become this fruitful. Your reward is proof that faith was never foolish. You're not lucky. You're chosen, and now it's time. You are not standing at the edge of breakthrough by accident. You were chosen, not because you were perfect, but because you were available, moldable, willing. All that's coming to you is not a coincidence, it's a covenant, and this is the season where heaven says, now, not next year, not when you're more confident, not when others approve, now. Your life is about to speak of divine timing, of restoration, of favor. And when it happens, remember, you didn't force it, you didn't chase it, you were faithful, and now it's being released. You are about to win everything, not because you are lucky, but because you are loved. Because love disciplines, molds, and prepares, and that preparation rarely feels like favor. It often feels like rejection, like waiting rooms that echo with silence, like tears falling without witnesses. But nothing in your journey was accidental, nothing in your pain was pointless. There were nights when your soul trembled beneath the weight of uncertainty, days when even hope felt like a lie. You prayed for breakthroughs but lived in breakdowns. You begged for peace but received pressure, and yet that pressure was not cruelty, it was craftsmanship. Every detour had design behind it. The job you didn't get, the relationship that crumbled, the friend who vanished when you needed them most. It all felt like loss. But in heaven's record, it was protection. You weren't being stripped to punish you. You were being stripped to strengthen you. The things you cried over were the same things God removed to make space for the blessing that can't coexist with compromise. God wasn't being silent. He was being strategic. Even your delays had a rhythm. Even your silence had a soundtrack, because every breakdown in your life introduced you to the truth about who you are. It wasn't in success that your identity formed. It was in the wilderness. It was in that pit of confusion where you found your real voice. In the dark, you learned to see without your eyes. When people stopped believing in you, you learned to believe anyway. When your prayers weren't answered, you learned to endure anyway. That's not wasted pain. That's sacred preparation. Look at your life and trace the pattern. How every betrayal built your boundaries. How every rejection refined your focus. How every setback became the soil where humility was planted. You didn't become wise because of applause. You became wise because you were abandoned and had to think clearly in chaos. You learned to discern who truly loved you when no one had anything to gain from your presence. You learned to walk by faith when sight failed you. You became dangerous to the enemy when you stopped needing validation. The strength you now carry didn't come from easy seasons. It came from hard conversations with God where you said, "I don't understand," and He said, "Trust me," and you did. You trusted Him when the bank account was empty. When the diagnosis came, when the doors closed, when the opportunity slipped away, you trusted, not because it made sense, but because something inside whispered, "This will make sense one day." That whisper. That was the truth, and now the day is coming where that truth becomes visible. The blessing that's about to unfold in your life is not a reward for pretending to be strong. It's a result of refusing to give up when you were weak. Others saw the version of you that smiled. God saw the version of you that worshipped with trembling hands, knelt with a broken heart, stayed kind when you had every reason to be bitter. And that version of you, that honest, scarred, surrendered version, is the one heaven is honoring. And you didn't just survive to tell the story. You survived because you are the story. People will look at you and see proof that endurance isn't wasted, that long nights do lead to bright mornings, that obedience in the fire leads to promotion in the palace. That pain can become prophecy, that scars can become signs. Your life is a living curriculum for others learning how to wait, how to trust, how to bleed with grace. Now the reason becomes clear. God is not giving you reward to make you look great. He's releasing what was always yours, because now you're ready to carry it, not with pride, not with insecurity, but with the quiet confidence that only comes from knowing, "I've been prepared for this." You didn't skip steps, you endured the process, and because of that, every single struggle, every single tear, was a brick in the foundation of the promise that is now being fulfilled. The reward is not a surprise. It's the next step in a sequence that heaven authored from the beginning. You've walked through fire, and because of that, you're now walking into favor. But before favor could find you, fire had to refine you. And fire, more often than not, burns away the crowd. That's where isolation entered. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Before you could carry this favor, you had to be separated, not from love, not from God, but from the noise that blurred your identity. You had to be stripped of dependence on applause, on opinions, on temporary relationships that distracted you from your eternal calling. Isolation wasn't loneliness, it was clarity. In the silence, things became visible that once hid behind noise. In the absence of affirmation, you were forced to confront the questions that applause once buried. You discovered who you are when no one else was watching. You found out what you believed when no one else agreed. That discovery, that was divine. Not every wilderness is a curse. Some are classrooms, and yours became the most sacred space for transformation. You didn't just lose people, you lost patterns, habits that no longer served you, thoughts that held you hostage, behaviors that kept you in cycles, and in losing those things, you found room to be rebuilt. You were not abandoned, you were being emptied of the unnecessary. Think back. How many nights did you ask, "Why am I alone in this?" How many mornings did you wake up to silence so thick it almost screamed, but in that stillness God was speaking. In that emptiness He was building. The quiet was not absence, it was surgery, deliberate, painful, necessary. You were being reshaped, not for comfort, but for calling. You didn't know it then, but every unanswered text, every ignored call, every invitation you never received, was a step deeper into your sacred transformation. It had to be private. Not everyone can witness the becoming of a soul. Not everyone can stand beside you while you wrestle your past, confront your wounds, and release your false identities. Some chapters require solitude because the work being done is too deep for public commentary. You weren't just being hidden, you were being healed in the dark, in the quiet, in the holy hush of divine redefinition. And what did you find there? You found truth, that you're more than the room you walk into, that your worth isn't determined by who chooses you, that presence isn't always proof of love, and absence isn't always loss. You learned that being chosen by God often means being separated from the familiar, that elevation always costs something, and that cost for you was isolation. But notice this, while you were isolated, you were not idle. Something was shifting inside you. Your priorities changed, your vision sharpened. What used to excite you began to feel empty. What you once tolerated started to offend your spirit. You no longer craved noise. You started craving truth, not just the truth that comforts, but the truth that cuts and heals. The kind of truth that transforms you. That transformation is why you can now walk into favor without being consumed by it, because isolation taught you that value doesn't come from visibility. You are not hungry for validation anymore, because you've tasted the fullness of divine intimacy. You're not desperate for attention, because you've learned the power of stillness. You don't need the room to see you. You've already been seen by the one who called you. You walk differently now, not because you've arrived, but because you've been altered. The silence taught you how to listen, the stillness taught you how to hear, and the absence taught you how to recognize real presence. You are no longer who you were. You've been refined, rebuilt, redefined. You're not bitter about the people who left. You're grateful because their absence created the atmosphere where your spirit could finally breathe. This is why your favor will last. It's not built on who you were trying to impress, but on who you became when no one was watching. Your reward isn't just coming to you because you waited. It's coming to you because in the waiting you changed, and now that change has prepared you to receive what isolation was always leading you toward. And what isolation led you toward, others couldn't see, because while you were becoming, the world went silent, messages stopped, invitations dried up, the calls never came, and at first it felt personal, like you were invisible, forgotten, overlooked. But you weren't being ignored for rejection's sake. You were being hidden for preparation's sake. There is a difference, and that difference saved you. When people stopped reaching out, heaven was reaching in. You felt like the background, but God was laying the groundwork. He was preparing a table in the presence of absence. While others were choosing trends, you were choosing truth. While they celebrated temporary success, you were cultivating eternal strength. You didn't ask to be ignored, but you learned to survive it, and not just survive. You learned to grow through it, because in that season you weren't being punished, you were being processed, you weren't dismissed, you were being set apart. Every time you were skipped, heaven was scheduling something. Every time you were passed over, Your name was being written into something permanent. It's hard to understand while it's happening. When no one sees your effort, applauds your kindness, or honors your sacrifice, it feels like all of it is wasted. But nothing done in faith is ever wasted. God does not forget. Every prayer you whispered in a tear-soaked pillow. Every act of obedience when you didn't have strength. Every yes you gave in secret. It was seen, not by the audience you wanted, but by the audience that matters, and that audience remembers. When people stopped clapping, heaven started counting. Every moment of silence on earth was matched with a moment of documentation in eternity. God isn't moved by noise. He's moved by the posture of the heart, and your heart stayed soft when it could have turned to stone. That softness, that humility, that refusal to become bitter when the world overlooked you, that's what turned the key. That's what unlocked the next level of your calling. You stayed low. You stayed faithful. You chose character over credit, and now the reward is being shaped, not based on popularity, but on purity. Think of it. If they had celebrated you too early, would you have stayed grounded? If you had been accepted by every crowd, would you have still chosen to be set apart? You were ignored not to break you, but to protect you from being shaped by the wrong affirmation. God didn't want you to rely on applause that could change tomorrow. He wanted you to build on a foundation that never moves. The silence made you sensitive. You can now hear whispers others miss. Because you learned to live without needing the world to validate you, you're free. That freedom is priceless. That freedom is rare. And that freedom is what makes you ready. When God prepares a reward, He doesn't base it on how loud you were. He looks at how loyal you remained when no one was looking. You weren't waiting in vain. You were being watched. You weren't skipped. You were saved. You weren't forgotten. You were being formed, and that formation was internal, because when the blessing comes, and it will come, you'll carry it differently. You won't hold it with arrogance. You'll hold it with reverence, because you'll remember the silence. You'll remember the feeling of invisibility, and in that memory, you'll honor the one who saw you first. So now, when the reward begins to reveal itself, don't shrink back in shame or disbelief. Receive it boldly, because it wasn't luck, it wasn't chance, it wasn't coincidence. It was the result of every moment you were faithful in the dark. God prepares in silence what He reveals in light, and your life is about to speak loudly, not because you shouted, but because you were silent and trusted. That reward is not compensation, it's confirmation. Confirmation that your obedience mattered, that your pain had purpose, that your stillness had strength. The same world that once ignored you will watch what heaven releases, but don't seek revenge in their attention. Let your peace be the proof, let your joy speak for itself, because the reward wasn't meant to prove your worth. It was meant to fulfill your purpose, and purpose cannot be rushed. It must be purified. What you once called a delay was never a punishment. It was a process. You thought the silence was rejection, but it was actually preservation. You thought the closed door was a denial, but it was divine redirection. God wasn't ignoring you, He was refining you, because anything eternal must be forged in fire, not fashioned by haste. The delay taught you to discern. It showed you the difference between desires born from your flesh and desires born from your spirit. In the waiting, you stopped asking for what looked good and started asking for what was good. You stopped chasing quick answers and started seeking deep wisdom. The surface-level prayers gave way to deeper ones, not for things, but for strength. Not for comfort, but for clarity. Not for outcomes, but for obedience. You thought the blessing was behind the next opportunity, but it was hidden in the next transformation. Delay exposed what you still needed to surrender. It surfaced the insecurities you would have buried under success. It highlighted the fears that would have sabotaged the promise if you received it too soon. It brought you face to face with the version of you that could not carry what you were asking for. And slowly, layer by layer, God began to remove what didn't belong. The waiting room is where self-will dies and true trust is born. It's where you stop trying to manipulate the outcome and start maturing in faith. It's where you trade control for surrender, where you trade urgency for patience. You don't just wait for the blessing, you become the person the blessing was always meant for. The delay wasn't wasting time, it was using time to prepare you for something bigger than you imagined. Think about how many things you wanted that you're now glad you didn't receive. How many people you prayed for that would have broken you. How many paths you almost forced open that led nowhere. What felt like punishment was actually protection. Because the truth is, God never said no. He said not yet, and in some cases he said not this way, not because you were unworthy, but because you were still becoming. It takes humility to trust God's timeline when your own expectations are screaming. It takes faith to believe the unseen when everything visible looks like failure. But you held on, even when your prayers echoed, even when your timeline expired, even when others moved on and you stayed still. You didn't give up, you grew up, and that growth is why the delay worked for your good. Refinement doesn't look like progress. It looks like silence, surrender, struggle, but beneath the surface, your roots were growing. Your foundation was being secured, and now, what once seemed like delay was actually development. You were being aligned with something that doesn't collapse. You were being shaped into someone who doesn't settle. You were learning how to walk by trust, not timelines. You see, anyone can believe when the breakthrough comes fast, but it's those who endure the long middle, the wilderness between the word and the fulfillment, who carry unshakable faith. And that's who you've become. You are no longer moved by delay because you've seen what it produces. Discernment, depth, discipline. You're no longer anxious about timing because you understand God is never late. He's never early, he's always exact. Your breakthrough is not random, it's right on schedule. And when it comes, it will come so clearly, so swiftly, so completely, that you will understand why every delay had to happen, why every prayer had to wait, why every answer had to be held back until the right moment. You'll realize that if it had come earlier, it would have crushed you, but now it will crown you, because you are not who you were when you started praying. You've changed, you've been refined, and that refinement is your readiness. What felt like divine distance was actually divine intimacy. What you called delay, God called design. The process wasn't there to torment you, it was to transform you. Now you walk with a quiet strength, the kind that only comes from delayed dreams that taught you to depend on the giver, not just the gift. You're not just receiving a reward. You've become someone who can carry it without crumbling under its weight. Because the weight you carried in the refinement was not empty, it was sacred, and heaven does not waste sacred suffering. The breaking you endured was measured. Every crushing season, every hidden moment, every time you were overlooked, misunderstood, or underestimated, it was all preparation for something weighty, something worthy. What's coming is not light, because your endurance wasn't light. The depth of your character now demands a blessing that is equally deep, equally undeniable. You didn't go through all of that just to receive something average. You didn't cry out in the dark for ordinary. You didn't fight internal battles and survive spiritual storms to arrive at something mediocre. Your journey has qualified you for overflow, not because you earned it, but because you were entrusted with the process. And only those who are trusted with fire can be trusted with fullness. This is why the reward must match the refinement. You've been enlarged by the process. Your capacity has increased. What would have overwhelmed you last year now fits easily within you. Because the pain stretched you, the silence matured you, the delay expanded your internal walls, you were being made into a vessel strong enough to hold glory, not just blessings, and because of that, the reward will not be common. What's coming will reflect the growth no one else could see, the kind of growth that happens in private, when you chose integrity over opportunity, when you forgave without apology, when you stayed when walking away would have been easier. The reward will be customized, not based on how loud your suffering was, but based on how deeply you were shaped by it. God doesn't just pay back, He restores, and when He restores, He multiplies, and that multiplication doesn't just touch one area of your life. When the refinement is full, the reward overflows. Spirit, soul, and circumstance begin to align. Opportunities open that no man could orchestrate. Doors swing wide that you didn't knock on. The right people arrive, not to complete you, but to complement what you've already built with God. You start to see favor that follows you, not because you're trying to chase it, but because you've become someone favor recognizes. There is a dignity that rests on people who have suffered in silence and remained faithful. That dignity attracts divine attention. You've been through too much to receive too little. The harvest will not be partial. The table God is setting will not be in the shadows. The very places that ignored your process will now witness your elevation, not for spectacle, but for glory. Not to boast, but to point, because the story isn't just yours. It's His through you. When God rewards, He doesn't just restore what you lost. He gives beyond what you imagined. Not only will the reward match the refinement, it will exceed it. The tears you cried in confusion are being gathered into rivers of peace. The nights you wrestled with doubt are being traded for mornings of unshakable confidence. The years you thought were wasted are now becoming the very evidence of your faith. This is not just compensation, it is calibration. What's being released over your life is in exact alignment with the weight of the process you carried. That's why the blessing will not crush you, because you've already carried something heavier. You've carried delay without despair, you've carried promise without proof, you've carried vision without validation, and because of that, you are now ready. The shift will be swift, but it won't feel foreign. Because the weight of the blessing will feel familiar to the weight of the preparation, that's how you'll know it's divine. It will feel like alignment, not anxiety. It will settle into your life with grace, not pressure. It will be too big to explain, but too real to deny. You'll look back and see that nothing was wasted, not the wait, not the weeping, not the wandering. The blessing you're walking into will feel like home, not because you've seen it before, but because you've become the person it was always meant for. You are no longer waiting to be ready, you are ready. And heaven always rewards readiness with fullness, not just enough to get by, but more than enough to pour out. Because when heaven pours, it overflows into the open. What has been cultivated in secrecy is now maturing into something undeniable. God does not just reward in the shadows. He reveals in the spotlight, not for pride, not for performance, but so the testimony becomes louder than the trials. You endured quietly, but the reward will speak loudly. The same places where you were dismissed will witness the display of divine favor. This is why you couldn't force visibility before, because premature exposure would have brought unnecessary battles. But now, God is not just releasing the blessing. He's unveiling you with it, not for applause, but for impact. You will no longer have to explain your worth. You will no longer have to prove your transformation. The evidence will speak where your words once failed. Those who doubted you will no longer be able to deny what is on your life. And this unveiling is not about ego. It's about clarity. When God blesses publicly, He is making a statement, not about your perfection, but about His faithfulness. He's using your life to announce that obedience still matters, that purity still has power, that quiet endurance carries weight in heaven, and now, what you carried in the dark will cast light into rooms you never thought you'd enter. You didn't build a platform, you built a prayer life. You didn't chase attention, you chased alignment. That's why the reward can be trusted, because it's not rooted in performance, it's rooted in obedience. And obedience, when tested and proven, is always followed by visibility, not to feed your flesh, but to fulfill a promise. You weren't working for the spotlight, but now the spotlight will work through you. This is why the stage is being set, not for a show, but for a shift. There are people who need to see what surrender really looks like. They've heard sermons, they've read promises, but now they'll see it in your life. Not because you're flawless, but because you're faithful. Not because you're the most talented, but because you were the most surrendered. God elevates the humble, not to flatter them, but to frame them as a witness of what he can do through obedience. The very people who wrote you off will witness the very thing they said would never happen, not because you're better, not because they were wrong, but because God wants them to know it was him. Every door that opens now will do so with clarity. It wasn't connections, it wasn't strategy, it wasn't effort alone. It was favor, and favor leaves fingerprints. It marks things with a supernatural signature that no man can duplicate. You see, the reward that's coming is not just for your comfort, it's for others' conviction. People will remember your journey. They'll recall the season where you were silent, where you were still, where you were hidden. And when they see the transformation, they won't be able to attribute it to trends or timing. They'll have to wrestle with the reality of a God who exalts in due season. And this due season will not be subtle, because God isn't interested in small ripples. He's releasing a wave, one that will touch generations, shift environments, and awaken those who have grown weary in waiting. Your reward will be a signpost, a living reminder that God finishes what he starts, that delay is not defeat, that silence is not absence, that obedience still brings rain, and now the rain is coming, not a drizzle, but a downpour. Not just to soak your soil, but to refresh others who are dry, because the reward wasn't just for you, it was through you. You became the vessel in the fire, and now you become the voice in the field. The same people who used to pity you will now seek your counsel. The ones who overlooked you will now overhear your name in places you've never been. You won't have to advertise the favor on your life. It will announce itself through your peace, through your fruit, through your endurance. The favor of God never whispers. When he moves, he makes sure the world sees the weight of his glory resting on someone the world once counted out. You are that someone, and the time is now.